And the power of those pills, I've never experienced a chemical pull like that in my life. And I knew after like 3 days of taking things, I was like, these are going to get me. Like, I'm not strong enough to withhold. Like, my willpower is just not strong enough to keep me away from this. And I had to just get off them like right then. Talk to me about how big a problem Oxycontin are, and are you seeing this sort of second tier of addicts emerging now as a result of that use?
Yeah. And yeah, I see it. I saw a ton of it when I was in treatment. Like I went through, various treatment centers, and I saw a ton of it there with, pro football players, pro hockey players, a lot of hockey players because, it's Canada. um, but yeah, they would have an injury, and the doctor would prescribe them morphine and then Oxycontin. And, with Oxycontins, the doctors were giving them out like candy because I think they didn't know exactly the extent of how bad those were. Um, and then they would just cut them off cold turkey. And so a lot of these guys didn't have any other resource other than to go to the streets and get street drugs to compensate for, you know, their withdrawals and, to continue the pain relief, right? So they're still in physical pain and, mental pain because now they've lost their career and there's depression there. And like I was saying before about, the neurochemistry in their brain, like, maybe they're just more susceptible to that connection with addiction than most other people. So yeah, I saw plenty of that in treatment where, pro athletes would, have one injury and it just took them down such a dark path.
Have you watched Dope Sick?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. And that's a very, very good example, just the bottom line.
Mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, those kind of shows, they're intense, but I think it's also just shows how it can take just such a hardworking day-to-day person and take them from their job, from their family to the streets and to just the hell that addiction has and can put on a person. It can take it just that's the thing about addiction is it doesn't discriminate, right? Like it can take anyone at any time. And that's the scary part. And I think that show is kind of a good example of that as well.
At what point did you recover? Sorry, at what point did you discover cycling, and how big a catalyst was that in your recovery?
Um, well, to be honest, like cycling has always kind of been like I come from a family of professional athletes. So my dad was a pro hockey player. My sister, she's an Olympian. Like she's incredible. Like I don't know how she did it. She went through kind of the same type of, you know, the same kind of thing, and she managed to just become a professional runner. She did so well for herself, so I'm super proud of her for that. And so I came from a family of professional athletes. My uncle was a, pro and cyclist in Europe, and my cousin was in the world tour as well. And so I think cycling was, oh, I was aware of it, but I wasn't aware of the extent of it until I was in detox with a gentleman that owned a bike shop, and I was lucky enough to be able to get a bike from him. And we would sit around in the treatment center and watch Tour de France and go for rides and stuff like that. And like coming from genetically, I think a pretty adept family into endurance athletics, it kind of came pretty naturally. So when I discovered it, it changed everything. Like it kind of substituted skateboarding perfectly because all skateboarding is so much time and energy in the same kind of way cycling has too. So you can go out there with friends or you can go out there solo and just put the time and the effort in. And that's kind of what I was doing at that time, was just going out for long rides all day every day. And I treated it somewhat to skateboarding. It was like, if you get better, you got to get better, you got to put in tons of time and tons of effort. And yeah, so I kind of saw the true side of cycling, like kind of learned how team tactics were, kind of saw more the racing side of cycling as opposed to, what I grew up with my family.
And what's interesting with cycling, the structure of it, in competitive cycling at least, it's built, the architecture is built in such a way that there's such a perfect feedback loop. When you put in more effort, you get better results. They're rewarded with points, and then you cat up. So you start off cat 4, you put in some effort, now you're cat 3. You put in some more effort, now you're cat 2. You put in some more effort, now you're cat 1. It's really incentivized to keep you progressing, which has got to be so helpful for
Right.
staying clean.
Well, and that's kind of like where I first really saw the growth in how cycling was working for me so well, not just in recovery, but just in finding a substitute for skateboarding. And like, I feel like I've always been a pretty athletic person throughout my whole life. Like, athletics was pushed on us so much as growing up, coming from professional athletes, and so when I found cycling, and I went into my first race, and I think I had no idea how to race. I just went out there from the gun and just rode as hard as I could. Didn't know what the hell I was doing. Ended up winning by like 3 minutes, and I was like, oh, okay, this is fun. And then I had some friends that kind of were like, oh, well, this is how it works. Like, this is kind of how the categories work. This is what the teams are. This is blah, blah, blah. And I didn't have a team for quite a while, the first year or so, but that's where I saw that growth was I would go from cat 4, and then, I went up to cat 3, to cat 2, cat 1. And that's where that growth was really kind of validating for me that I had chosen the right path.